This is Jennifer Bilbrey. I'm here with Saro Helpinstill and Adam Maurer, and today we're going to be talking about counseling and LGBTQ relationships. So let's just start with that LGBTQ phrase. What do those letters stand for? I think a lot of people don't know what they are, so tell us.
Yeah. So I think in the community, I found that a lot of people who are allies get intimidated by all those letters.
Yeah.
And so it can be helpful to start there. Sarah, do you want to talk about what they are?
Sure. The L is for lesbian, G is for gay, B is bisexual, T is transgender, Q is generally queer, but you also might see QQ, and the other Q stands for questioning. You also might see an I, which stands for intersex, and then you also might see A, and that can be ally and androgynous. And there are other letters too, but those are the most frequently used.
And one question I get with the Q is, what does queer mean that's different from GLBT?
Yeah. So queer can mean that someone is really flexible in their gender, their sexuality, kind of their idea of who they are. So one day they may wake up and feel very feminine, and by lunchtime they feel much more masculine. So queer gives them an arena to be flexible in. Now it also can be difficult, because I think about older members of the community. Queer has for a long time been a derogatory comment or derogatory phrase.
Right.
And so some folks in the community are not comfortable with that. Folks that are younger, millennials, more readily identify with that.
So you're touching on something that I think is an important question for us to talk about, which is, how do we talk about the GLBTQ population and counseling that population, and recognize the richness and the variety in that population, and at the same time honor what is common to the population, and as therapists what we need to know clinically to treat a group of people that identify in a certain way.
The subtitle of our presentation is Same and Different.
Yeah.
And
nice.
it's important to recognize that some things about the community are the same. And for example, we pay taxes. We have children. We have families.
Jobs, stressors.
Right.
Everything that every couple experiences. You're going to find people having similar experiences in the community.
So let me stop you there, because you just said we. And so in preparing for this interview, one of the things we were talking about is coming out. So can you talk a little bit about coming out, the different arenas that happens in?
So
say more about.
So that would fall into the different category.
Yeah.
Because straight couples don't have the daily stressors that people in the GLBTQ community do. And getting away from that question a little bit, but this may be a good time to talk about how people in the community are bombarded with different pieces of information about not fitting into society, whether it's waking up in the morning and seeing a news story about a hate crime that was committed, or a piece of legislation that went against the community, or one of the current platforms that are here in the state of Texas politically.
Which is? People might not know.
Oh, so part of the GOP platform for Texas this year is about reparative therapy and supporting that. And reparative therapy is therapy that would say that you can change sexual orientation.
And something that, for instance, the American Psychological Association does not support, and that there's just tons of research showing that it doesn't work. Yeah. Okay.
So throughout the day, every single day, people in the GLBTQ community have these stressors that follow them around. And one of those is the question about coming out. And coming out is not something that just happens once when the person comes to terms with who they are and then has that big conversation with their family, has the big conversation with the friends, maybe even at the workplace. But coming out is something that happens almost on a daily basis, whether you're at the grocery store and your partner wants to hold your hand, and there's a part of you that pauses. Do I reach back for that hand? Do I want to come out in this place? Or even in language, like we need to call a plumber, and I'm not the one who's going to be able to meet you there, but my partner can. These little ways, and that may seem small on the outside, but it's still a question: is this a safe person for me to come out to?
And they're daily.
Daily.
These daily negotiations.
I would say even moment to moment.
Yeah.
So, I might, for example, someone might not be out at work, but after work they go to happy hour at a gay bar. So in one space, for whatever reason, they don't feel comfortable letting people know that they are in the community. And there's a number of reasons for that. Maybe they're fearful of losing their job. Maybe they're fearful of kind of being the face of the community for a bunch of people, which can be its own stressor. Or anything in between. When I think about outness, it's one thing for an individual, but then when you consider that individual can be part of a relationship, a couple, now they can be different layers of outness in different arenas. So perhaps someone's partner isn't out at their workspace, where the other person is as queer as Christmas, and it can create some challenges for that relationship. How do you then negotiate that? How do you work through that on a daily basis?
Sorry.
What?
Where's Christmas?
That's just a funny phrase. Never heard it. And before this, you were saying how important humor is in counseling this population. So maybe now's a good time to talk about that.
Yeah. So humor is a really important part of dealing with experiences. I think about how many couples that I've worked with who are able to come together and deal with all these stressors we've talked about today and the stigma, and really use each other as a way of working through that, being able to laugh at situations that otherwise might cause more pain.
Really important.
Be able to deal with their own issues within their relationship that way.
Yeah, so returning to this question of is there something common to this population, and how do we honor the richness versus how do we respect that there is something unique to counseling this population? What's important for the counselor to know? Especially I'm thinking politically, there have been a lot of changes recently, and so what's important for the therapist to know in terms of those changes? And
I think there may be a little bit of an assumption that because we had a couple of big wins with the Supreme Court that were pretty publicized, that I actually had somebody tell me recently, well, I thought everything was okay now. And things are so not okay now. And the ways that they're not okay cut across really big areas, not just with marriage inequality and all that goes into, but also not being able to get insurance, unequal adoption laws, which affects the whole family and kids in huge ways and can be very disruptive. What else do we just...
taxes.
Yeah, taxes. Actually, you can be married in one state but then not have it recognized in another state. But actually, because of the two big wins that we had with part of DOMA being thrown out, we could actually end up paying more in taxes as a gay couple and still not have equal rights.
Wow, I didn't know that.
And part of what I think about is I think about the trans community. So, a lot of times folks are going, well, Laverne Cox is this great representation and she just got nominated for an Emmy. So
Orange is the New Black.
Yeah.
So things are going well now. But that doesn't change the fact that trans women, especially trans women of color, are disproportionately a subject of violence. That that is a part of their daily lives of having to deal with safety issues. And
Which makes me think a real need for the therapist to be aware of that and to talk about risk and safety.
well,
Absolutely.
I think about, you have a couple in your office and maybe they're squibbling over the dishes being done at the house. And for the clinician to be able to consider that every time one of these people maybe leave the house, they have to think about their own safety and the stress of that. Then what is home? Home has a whole new meaning. Home's maybe the only place that person can be authentic and not necessarily have to worry about violence. And so to have that threatened, it brings a whole new meaning to the dishes getting done.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's an important thing that therapists need to be aware of too when you're considering, because we talk a lot about encouraging clients to be their authentic selves and to be real, and but for GLBTQ people that is a risk, and not only is it risky to trans people, but there's still plenty of violence being committed against gay, lesbian, and bisexual people as well.
I'm glad you brought this up because this is a real issue I struggle with my clients, really wanting them to realize their full self and be their authentic self.
We all do.
Yeah, but also wanting to recognize and appreciate the risk of that,
And I think
walking that line.
I think for people who are not in the community, that safety is often taken for granted. I think back to when I was in school, I had a student ask me if my husband and I would like to join her and her partner out dancing. And I was like, well, is it a safe place? And she was like, what do you mean? And I said, is that community going to be okay seeing two men line dance together? And she realized she never had to consider that with her husband.
Yeah.
And I think another thing that therapists need to be aware of is that even when people in the community aren't in situations where there's physical or emotional risk, it's still not something that you want to encourage people to be 100% of the time. Because the other factor that we haven't talked about is the energy that it takes to be out in every way all the time. And some people in the community may fit in that community in more than one way. So let's say you've got a person who identifies as lesbian, but also trans, or a bisexual person who considers themselves, one of the other letters too. It's like every time you add a letter, there's more energy that it takes just walking through the world. And you don't always feel like you've got the energy to be the token person who speaks up in the room, or the person who has to be the voice pointing out.
You don't always want to be the teacher.
Right.
And I think letting clients know it's okay, that they don't have to be the voice box for the whole movement. That there can be days when they are just feeling done with it and don't want to have to do with anything, and they don't want to tell anyone about who they are in the community.
And notice too that when that there's a trade-off, it's a bit of a double bind, because when you choose not to be the voice or choose not to come out to the cop who pulls you over and you say that your partner's your friend just because you don't want to deal with something or the potential for that you trade off a little bit of who you are because you're not being authentic. So we're saying, let your client have a break and a rest if that's what they choose, or let them assess that risk because they know better than you do.
Yeah.
But it's still, every time you take that little break, or every time you hide a little bit for safety, you're having to have a little bit of a death there too.
And I think it's important to bring this back to how that can impact a relationship.
Yeah.
So I think about all this stigma, all this pressure that could be going on for an individual. And
Compound that with,
so then when you
For
come...
two or more people in the relationship, that's right. So
Exponentially.
how important it is to have the home be a place of safety.
Yeah, and where someone can be authentic.
And the counselor's office
Yeah.
to be that place.
And one thing that I've come across, and Sarah, I'm interested in your perspective on this too, is that there can also be, within working with a couple, this notion that any sort of expectation or boundary can be seen as almost a violation of that authenticity. If one of the partners has a request it can be like, well, you're asking me to be something that I'm not really.
Like, can you give me an example? I'm not sure I'm following.
So
Yeah, so I'm thinking of the holidays or being
Yeah.
around family of origin.
yeah. So I think about this notion of, let's say I really want my partner to come home with me for Christmas.
Okay.
But my family maybe is pseudo supportive. And he says, no, I don't really want to go. And if I push him,
I see.
then it can easily become, well, you don't respect me, you don't respect where I'm at. And it can have a whole
Yeah.
deeper level of meaning.
Yeah.
And let's say that same couple does go, and there are different levels of physical affection there. You know, where I want you to come home with me, but I don't want you to hold my hand when we're sitting on the couch in the family room,
Yeah.
or make a big deal about the fact that my parents have pictures of my siblings and their families on the refrigerator, but we're not up there together. Let's not make a big deal about that. So how out are we going to be? How vocal are we going to be about our equality? And so that does put a lot of load on the relationship.
So much of what I hear you talking about is how important it is to create a space where clients feel like they can be their most authentic self. And this really makes me think about Carl Rogers and person-centered therapy and the importance of that idea of unconditional positive regard. So, because we're talking to therapists, can you talk a little bit more about that, about how crucial that safety is for a therapist to create?
Yeah.
I think a good place to start is with language when we talk about person-centered therapy, because every individual is going to be particular about what they want to be called, how they define themselves. I think a good example is what we were just talking about with, you may have a same-sex female couple. One of them may be want to call a lesbian. The other one may be want you to call them gay. So there could even be differences within a couple like that.
And I think about all the stigma and stressors we've been talking about today, and the notion that couples are bringing that into the session. And so it's really important that they have a safe space. And at the same time, it can be tricky for a clinician because you're trying to create that for two separate individuals.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what I think the challenge is to help the couple really turn towards each other and realize that they can offer each other that authentic space in daily life. And
Lovely.
to move past, oh, you're just lazy, you never do the dishes, to really understand a little bit about what that harm that can do to the relationship and how to look at it differently. Perhaps that partner isn't lazy and not doing the dishes. Perhaps they really value spontaneity. So when they get a phone call to go for coffee,
Yeah.
they just want to leave and go. And that shifts the conversation. All of a sudden, it's not, oh, you just make my life difficult. It's, I want to be the place where you can be spontaneous. Just think of me before you be spontaneous.
It was such a pleasure talking with y'all today, and I'm really looking forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, we're looking forward to the questions y'all have.
Thank you. We're really excited.